Have you ever just stopped and wondered what makes you, well, you? Why you think the way you do, feel the things you feel, and make the choices you make? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the amazing science that digs into those exact questions, psychology.
So let's just get this one out of the way right off the bat. A lot of people think, isn't psychology just common sense but with a bunch of fancy jargon? And you know what? That's a totally fair question. So let's start there and bust a few myths.
Okay, think about this classic saying, opposites attract. We hear it all the time in movies and books. Sounds right, doesn't it? But here's the thing. Psychological research tells a completely different story. After decades of studies, it turns out that similarity, sharing values, interests, a similar personality, is a way stronger predictor of a happy, long-lasting relationship. So right away, you can see it's not always what common sense tells us.
So what is psychology, officially? Well, it's the scientific study of two really important things. First, our behavior. That's all the stuff you can see, the actions we take. And second, our mental processes. This is the inner world, right? Our thoughts, our emotions, our memories. It's the combination of that outer world and our inner world that makes this field so incredibly fascinating.
Okay, so we've got a definition, but what's the point? What are psychologists actually trying to do? Well, it's not just random guesswork. Their work is actually guided by four very clear scientific goals.
And these four goals kind of work like a roadmap, each one leading to the next. First, they want to describe what's happening. Then, they try to explain it. Once they can do that, they can start to predict what might happen in the future. And finally, they can use all that knowledge to influence behavior for the better.
Let's start with number one, description. This is the what phase. It's all about just observing and recording what's going on, super carefully. So a psychologist might document how stress levels look different in teenagers versus adults. This is the bedrock, the raw data that everything else gets built on. Next up, we move from what to why. This is explanation. Here we're trying to figure out the causes behind what we've observed. So, if we see aggressive behavior, a psychologist might use something like social learning theory to explain that, hey, maybe this behavior was learned by watching others. This is where we get to play detective and start building theories. And this is where it gets really powerful. Once you can describe and explain something, you can start to predict it. You can make an educated guess about what's going to happen. For example, research might help us predict which teaching styles are most likely to help students succeed in a classroom. That's a huge deal.
And that brings us to the final goal, control. Now that word can sound a little scary, so a lot of people prefer to say influence. This isn't about manipulating people. It's about using what we know to solve real-world problems and help people. Like when a therapist uses specific techniques to help someone manage their anxiety. The whole point is to make a positive difference.
But wait, where did all of this even come from? Psychology, as a formal science, is actually pretty young, but the questions it's trying to answer, oh, they're ancient. So let's do a super quick history lesson on how it went from philosophical chats to a real-life science. For centuries and centuries, the big questions about the mind were handled by philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. But the real game changer happened in 1879. That's the year a guy named Wilhelm Wundt opened the very first experimental psychology lab in Germany. And that right there, that's the moment psychology officially became a science.
So, after Wundt lit that spark, the whole field just exploded. Suddenly you had all these different ideas about the best way to study the mind and behavior, which led to these competing schools of thought, all with their own unique take on things.
And one of the most powerful early schools was called behaviorism. This quote from its founder, John B. Watson, just sums it up perfectly. They basically said, if you can't see it and you can't measure it, it doesn't belong in science. It was a radical idea.
So for behaviorists, psychology was only about observable actions. That whole inner world of thoughts and feelings, they called it the black box. It was messy, unscientific, and totally off limits. They focused only on how the environment shapes what we do. You've probably heard of Pavlov's dogs, right? Ring a bell, give them food, soon just ringing the bell makes them drool. That's behaviorism in a nutshell, a learned response to a stimulus from the outside world.
But that leaves a pretty huge question hanging in the air, doesn't it? What about the black box itself? I mean, we can't just ignore our thoughts, our memories, our ability to solve problems, can we? And that exact limitation is what set the stage for the next big revolution.
And that revolution was the cognitive revolution. Starting around the 1950s, a new wave of psychologists came along and said, hold on, we can study mental processes scientifically. They were inspired by new technology like computers and starting thinking about the mind as a kind of information processor. This was the moment psychology decided to pry open that black box and bring things like memory, perception, and language roaring back into the spotlight.
So, we've covered the definition, the goals, a little bit of history, but let's get to the big question, why does any of this matter to you? The simple answer is because psychology is absolutely everywhere. It impacts nearly everything you do every single day.
Seriously, this isn't just academic theory. It's super practical. The way teachers design lessons so you'll actually remember them, that's psychology. In healthcare, understanding the link between our minds and bodies helps us manage stress. It shapes how companies build happy, productive teams. It's even behind the commercials you see on TV. It's a science that is constantly at work, all around us.
And that brings us to one last thought for you to take with you. Now that you've got this basic framework, what psychology is and what it tries to do, the real fun begins. So what's one part of your own life, maybe a habit you have, a relationship, a goal you're working toward, that you can now see through a brand new psychological lens?